Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The aim of today's session is to give you a better understanding of the Pro reports in Cloud Reports. These are powerful reports that provide you with detailed insights into achieved margin, sell-through rates and available stock cover. This in turn will help you make informed decisions when placing orders, discounting items and planning your budgets. You might find it helpful to follow along with today's session in your own reports. If you'd like to do this, now is a good time to get logged in so that you're looking at your Cloud Reports dashboard. So the session will be split into two parts. The first part will be focused on training. We'll go through the reports on the screen and I'll explain how to interpret and manipulate the data. In the second half, we'll be joined by Tom Bowden from Working Class Heroes. Tom is passionate about these reports and the impact they've had on his business. So he'll be sharing with us how he uses them to inform his buying decisions, budget setting and price pointing. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A function to submit them. We'll review the questions and answer as many as we can at the end. If we don't have time for any of the questions, don't worry, I'll respond to those via email afterwards. The last thing to mention before we start is that there'll obviously be quite a few screenshots of report data during this session, and I know everyone will be working on different screen sizes today. So if at any point you're struggling to see the data on the screen, you can always click on the screen share in Teams and just manually zoom in yourself on your own device. Okay, let's get going. So most of the Pro reports in Cloud Reports are found here at the top of the dashboard. They're all tagged with the Pro icon to denote that they're only available to Pro Cloud POS license holders. There are two further Pro reports towards the bottom of the dashboard in the Sales Reports section. I've highlighted those on the screen for you here. We're going to start with this report, Margin by Brand and Department. If you're following along with us, you can open this report now. To begin, you need to choose a date range to investigate. The dates you choose here will depend on the insights you're trying to gain from the report. So for example, if you were looking to purchase stock for Spring-Summer 2024, you'd want to be looking at sales for Spring-Summer 2023 as a starting point. If you're not working quite as seasonally as that, then a general rule would be to include at least 6 months of data in terms of giving you enough results to make reliable comparisons between your brands. So once you're happy with those dates, just click Generate Report. To begin with, you're presented with some summary figures, so we'll run through these first of all. The first summary provides an explanation of how the week's cover is calculated and which figures are being used in that calculation. Week's cover in this sense means if I continue to sell items at the rate they sold during that sales period, how many weeks of stock do I have remaining? So first, Cloud POS divides the cost of goods sold during your chosen period by the number of weeks in that period. In my example, that would be the cost of goods sold, or COGS, divided by 30.6, as there are 30.6 weeks in my chosen sales period. That provides an average cost of goods sold per week. It will then divide the cost of goods on hand, in other words, the value of stock that we have right now, by that average value to provide you with your number of weeks cover. Cloud Reports provide you with a worked example on the screen. If the cost of goods sold, or COGS, was £200, and we'd run the report for a 3-week period, that's an average of £66.67 per week. If we then divide the £1,000 of stock we currently have by that average, it gives us 15 weeks of stock remaining. After that, you're presented with your average margin and average sell-through rates for the set period. The margin average is used in the report to colour code the results in the grid. If a figure is 20% or more above the average margin, it shows in a bold green. If it's 10% or more above the average margin, it'll be in a pale green. Conversely, if a figure's 10% or more below the average margin, it shows in a pale red or pinkish colour, and if it's 20% or more under that average margin, it shows in a bold red. In this particular report, margin by brand and department, the average sell-through is just there as an overview. It's not actually shown as a data point for each brand and department in the table, but there'll be more about sell-through rate when we look at our next report, the seasonal buying planner. There's also a checkbox to allow you to exclude your non-inventory items. Ticking this will allow you to focus on stocked product and exclude items such as service codes and gift vouchers, so you'll probably want to use that. Okay, so let's take a look at the report data. We'll begin by understanding how the table is organised. By default, this report is grouped by brand and then by department, as the title suggests. Those brands and departments are all listed down the left-hand side of the table. Then to the right, we are presented with various data points for each department and brand, including that week's cover figure that we just mentioned, the current cost on hand, i.e. the value of stock right now, the cost of goods sold in the period, that's that line COGS column, the margin and the profit. Notice as well the colour coding on the margin column for figures that are 10 or 20% above or below the average margin. If you want to change the order of those columns, you can do so by interacting with this row of blocks just here. So the order of the blocks matches with the table on the right. So just as an example, if you wanted to swap profit and margin in the table, you'd swap the two blocks in this row. Above those blocks are further columns that you can add to the left-hand side of your table. As we said, the default is to group by brand and then break those brands down into departments, but you can change that if you like. You do this simply by dragging and dropping other columns into the table. For example, if we just wanted the brands, we could drag the department block up and out into that row, just like this, and that would remove it from the table underneath. So now we've got a feel for the report layout, let's start manipulating the actual data. First of all, we're going to order the data by the highest cost on hand. That's going to be important. It'll allow you to focus your attention on the brands where you have the current biggest inventory investment. To do that, you just need to right-click on the cost on hand column header and choose to sort brand by this column. That will then bring the most important brands in terms of current stock to the top of your table. You can then start to filter and manipulate the report to make comparisons across different areas of your inventory. So at this stage, you need to be asking yourself, what question am I trying to answer today? In other words, what insight are you trying to pull out of this data? Let's work through a few examples of what that might look like. So one question that you might want to ask is about how a particular type of product is performing across different brands that provide it. For example, if you're an equestrian retailer, considering your budget setting for this year's feed orders, you might ask yourself, which feed brands should I be investing in this year and which ones should I drop? To do this, I've swapped the order of brand and department in the table, so I've got department on the left, and this will then be divided down into brands on the right. Then I'm going to filter for the department feed specifically, using the drop-down arrow in the department column header. So here's our data. I'm looking now at my feed department on the left, and that's now subdivided into all of my feed brands on the right. The first thing I'm going to do is take note of the average margin for my feed department as a whole, which is down here at the bottom, 31.51%. I'm also going to take note of my average week's cover, 15.29. Just to note, I have removed a few rows here for the purposes of this webinar, so don't panic if you notice that that average isn't exactly an average of the figures that are on the screen just at the moment. One of the rows that might draw attention here is Superior Equine. This brand has a strong margin performance. It's colour-coded in bold green, meaning it's more than 20% above the average. Please note the colour coding here will respect the average margin for the complete report, not just for the particular brand or department that you might have begun to filter for. If you look over towards the left of that row, you can see it's also got a very low weeks cover, just 4.64 predicted weeks of stock remaining. So here we've got an indicator that we probably need to be ordering more of this high-performing brand. Let's compare that to MetroSpec. This brand also has an above-average margin performance, 46.01%, so it's tracking nicely above that 31.51 average for feed overall. However, its week's cover value is high compared to my feed stock generally at 27.74. With this brand, I might consider some discounting. I've got room to manoeuvre on that margin. I could reduce it slightly and still be easily above the average for my feed range, which should help me to get these units moving. The margin by brand and department report can also highlight brands that you might want to consider dropping or reducing in your next round of orders. So let's take a look at Hazelby. It has a poor margin performance of 18.58% compared to the average. It's also got a high weeks cover. It's 66.76 compared to the average of 15.29 for feed in general. This might be a brand that you don't buy again, as it looks like it's not really working. A final row that I'll pull out as an example from here is VetSense. This one actually looks like a data error. The margin is negative. My revenue for the items sold was £10, but the cost of those goods was £14. This is a really important point. All of your cloud reports rely on the quality of the data that you input into CloudPOS as a whole, and especially your cost prices. So if you're not already, we'd strongly recommend a process of checking costs against your invoices when you receive a delivery through Goods In. If you need to make any adjustments, you can do that directly on the Goods In screen. This will help to ensure that the average weighted costs of your items are accurate, which in turn provides you with accurate reporting on margin, weeks cover, cost of goods, and so on. In other words, short summary, quality of data in equals quality of data out. In this example scenario with the VetSense brand, I'd want to go away and check those products and make sure the supplier costs are sorted out in the back office before I place any more orders. So, just to summarise a few key takeaways from the margin by brand and department report before we move on. First of all, order your data by cost on hand so you can focus on your biggest brands first. Reorganise and filter the report to suit the question you're trying to answer. Keep that question in mind throughout. The colour coding allows you to spot under and overachievers for margin at a glance. Always take note of your average figures and compare against them. And remember, as with all margin and cost-based reports, the accuracy of your cost data is paramount. We'd recommend checking costs at Goods In to maintain an accurate cost of stock. We'll now move on to look at another example pro report, the seasonal buying planner. You'll see some similarities here with the margin by brand and department report that we just looked at, but now we're going to focus on sell-through rates as well as achieved margin. Again, the report begins with a date selector, and then after generating, you're presented with a summary of the week's cover calculation, your average margin, and your average sell-through. I'm ticking to exclude non-inventory items again here, so I can focus on stocked product. So this report is grouped by season and by brand by default. Again, the colour coding is shown above and below the averages, but this time we have that data for sell-through as well as achieved margin, and you can see that on the very far right-hand side of the screen. The filtering and organising of the grid can be achieved in exactly the same way as the margin by brand and department report. So again, you may well want to start with that cost on hand sorting. Just right click on the column header and sort brand by this column. With this report, I'll consider the example question: where are there opportunities to improve or maximise margin in my clothing ranges? So I'm going to imagine that I'm making plans for my autumn-winter 2024 clothing products. So I'm going to focus on the autumn-winter 2023 range to begin with. To help answer that question, I've already filtered the department list to clothing only up here at the top. That column doesn't need to be in the report in order to use it for filtering, and that goes for all of the other columns that you can see in that row. I'm also going to take note of my average margin and sell-through for the date range as a whole, and the week's cover as well. One row that might draw attention here is Valera. So I can see from the colour coding that it's got a strong sell-through performance, but the margin is low. So you can start to use the seasonal buying planner to drill down further into where those values are coming from. To do this, I'm going to filter the brand column to just focus on Valera for now, and I'm also then going to bring down that category column into this grid. So now I'm able to better understand what's going on with this brand. One thing just to note, when you get to this more detailed level of data, the colour coding is still referring to the average margin and sell-through for your whole report, not just for any specific brands, departments, categories, etc. that you might have begun to filter for. That's why the very top row here, outdoor jackets, is in bold red, even though the margin's almost identical to the average for this particular brand, department and season. It's still tracking below the overall average margin for our report. Still, this is really useful for helping us investigate where that 14.21% for Valera is coming from. So first of all, if you look to the fourth row, trousers, we've got a negative margin there. So that seems to be another data error. And bear in mind that will obviously be skewing that overall average. Casual jackets in the third row, also particularly poor at just 7.07%. Now, bearing in mind the average margin for the original whole data set was 36.27%, we've got four categories here that are tracking around that level: headwear, t-shirts, heavy knits and boots. So that's better than the 14.21% for this brand overall. From this view, we can also take away that both the jacket categories, outdoor jackets and casual jackets, could really do with some margin improvement. So all of this might give us reason to go away and look at our trade prices or costs for that supplier and consider if we can negotiate for the next orders. We might look to buy more heavily in the four categories with the better margin performance in here, and then try to negotiate on those jackets. With the pro reports like this on hand, you've got the data you need to back up those discussions with your suppliers. However, one caution here: the lower margin on this brand overall could also be because it's just not such a high-end brand, or it could be the kind of brand that you carry to benefit the overall presence of your business. And this highlights a really important point about working with the pro reports. Your contextual knowledge is really important. You might be deliberately stocking a particular brand because it supports the sale of another brand. So that might look like below average performance according to the raw data, but it would be justified by the impact that it has elsewhere. Similarly, you might spot that your winter rugs or your winter jackets look like they've been moving really slowly. But if we've just experienced an unusual warmer spell and it's about to get much colder, that would be reason to believe that that's okay. Those sales will probably pick up soon. So make sure you always contextualize the data on the screen with your own brand and industry knowledge. So just coming back to my original question here, where are there opportunities to improve or maximise margin in those clothing products? I'm also interested in where I can utilise strong margin performance. So if we look at California, it's sitting just outside my top 5 at the moment, but it's actually performing above average for margin. It's got a strong sell-through rate and the week's cover is looking okay as well. So to get the most out of my margin, I might look to invest more heavily in this brand going forwards to champion it and promote it into my top 5. It might be that I actually take some investment away from Hilltops, which is in the 4th row just here, and assign that to the California budget instead. Hilltops has a higher week's cover, its sell-through is much lower, and it's made far less profit for my business. So, just a few key takeaways from this report. Use the colour coding again to help you balance performance across margin and sell-through rates. Again, manipulate the report. For example, add those further columns like category to interrogate the detail of where those margin and sell-through rates are coming from. Always use your brand and industry knowledge to contextualise the data when making your decisions, and use that data to assist you in your supply negotiations. You'll be able to justify exactly where any lower margin performance is coming from within your brands and within your ranges. So the pro reports are useful not just for working out what to buy, but also for what to move on through sales, star buys and other promotions. This is an area where the Find Aged Stock report can be particularly helpful. By default, this report will look for any item lookup codes that haven't sold in the past 60 days and then show you the stock you currently hold of those items. That date, 60 days previously, will be shown on the screen, so that's the 12th of November 2023 for today's date. If you want to change that though, just click into the field and you make a different selection. Again, think about what question you're trying to answer when you set this date. Then when you're ready, click Generate to run the report. When you first do that, you'll see a stock by supplier summary table. First of all, that just simply shows the value of your current stock for each supplier and then represents that as a percentage. Once you scroll down past that, you get to the main section of the report. By default, it's grouped by season. So let's think about the scenario of a brand who release seasonal ranges and colour options each year for quite similar products. So to look at that, I've filtered just for that brand using this column header here. And I'm also thinking about this in the context of a clothing range. So I've filtered department for just riding wear in this example. Now I'm going to expect to see the most stock value in my newer seasons. So this one here might draw your attention. It's the Autumn-Winter 2022 range, but it's actually got a higher stock holding than Autumn-Winter 2023, which is just below it. So I want to interrogate that in a bit more detail. You can do that by clicking these plus icons, and that will just expand the list of items within that group. Just switching to a different view here, I've expanded that row and then I've zoomed in on the important columns of this table. I've also chosen to order by the stock value on hand, just there on the right, again to bring those highest values to the top. So now I can see that a significant amount of that aged stock is actually held across these top 2 items, and in fact they're 2 sizes of the same jersey. Furthermore, the extra large of that same jersey in the 4th row just here also ranks pretty highly in terms of stock value. So this could suggest to us that these are items that require action. We need to get this jersey moving through a sale or similar promotion. So the last pro report that we're going to use as an example, just during the training section of today's webinar, is found towards the bottom of the dashboard. These two sales over time reports are great when you get to the stage of actually placing orders with your suppliers. It's easy to group and filter these reports by size and by colour, so you can make sure you've got your balance of product right within a particular range. The reports have the same organisation of columns as one another, but one report will give you the sales data in terms of quantity sold, whereas the other gives that sales data in terms of financial revenue. So I'm going to use the quantity sold as my example today. Once you've set your date range and generated this report, it will also give you the option to apply a channel filter. For example, retail to just focus on in-store purchases, or citrus store/e-commerce if you want to look at online sales. You'll also find a filter for Amazon and eBay in that drop-down for users of those integrations. There's also a row of grouping buttons here to allow you to quickly organise the data. In my example, which you'll see in just a moment, I'm using department/category. I'm also ticking the box to exclude non-inventory items again here. Once that grouping was in place, I've then actually customised that a bit further. So I've dragged the department back out of the report into that top row because I want to focus just on category for the time being. And then I've brought down the size column. This will allow me to start analysing my size curve. For example, aside from the non-sized beanies, you can see those in the very top row of the data. We sold 6 of those. The next highest volume of sales within this data set has actually been for the size smalls, which I've just highlighted on the screen there. Now you can go into much more detail with this report when you're actually placing your orders, because you can also start adding individual descriptions and item lookup codes. Colour is there as an option as well, so you can establish where the most popular colours might have been within a range and then aim to match that to incoming colours in next year's range. There's a lot of layout options with this particular report and the partner report, which gives these totals in financial terms. So I definitely recommend just having an experiment with the manipulation of this data. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the first section of today's webinar. I'm now very pleased to introduce Tom Bowden, who is owner and CEO of Working Class Heroes. Thank you, Tom, for joining us today.
No worries.
So obviously you're here to share with us some more real-world experience of using these reports, and I know you're quite passionate about their importance for you and your buying team in particular. So one area that we discussed in particular when we were preparing for today was how you use the margin by brand and department report to find items for price pointing, or more specifically, items you might want to move on through discounting. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Well, first of all, apologies for my coughing and spluttering. I need to stop smoking so many cigars. Thanks for the introduction and all the information just there. My presentation style might be quite a bit different to yours.
Fine, Tom, don't
worry.
I
think yours possibly a bit more useful and easy to listen to than my ramblings.
Not at all.
You mentioned I have a passion for cloud reports. That's quite accurate. I don't know what that says about my character, but for over a decade now, Working Class Heroes has grown with revenue and maintained good levels of gross margin. There's a number of factors for that, and one of the key things and the key steers has been the data in cloud reports. Excuse me, and in particular the report, I always get the name of it wrong even though I use it every day, margin by brand by department. There's so much information in this report. There's so many different ways it can be manipulated to answer the questions that you're seeking. One thing that it helps us do as well, which I find particularly useful, is we call it keeping the blinkers on.
Okay.
We're not so much looking at what's going on with our competitors, but we're looking at our own data. And that stops, as I call it, the race to the bottom to be the cheapest, because that's not really where we want to be. So you can believe in your own data and make decisions based upon what you're doing. And I think that's really useful. Just before we look into this, the first question we're going to answer is, when would be a good time to price point, and how might you price point? The first thing to say is to highlight what you've mentioned, is this is as good as the data that you put in.
Absolutely.
You have to ensure, without fail, that your cost pricing that goes in is accurate to the invoices. And this system is very good because it works out your average cost prices if things have changed. There's no work around that.
No, there's no shortcut, is there, to accurate cost data, unfortunately.
No, and that should be happening for financial control anyway, but it needs to be done for this data.
Absolutely.
The other thing to say here is have a good rule for your seasons, and making sure you know the chronology and how old your product is. Here at Working Class, we run 2 seasons. We run spring, summer, we run autumn, winter. But it's the same every single year, and it's 6-month blocks. It means that when you're comparing the performance of stock over time, you've got a base.
Yeah.
You don't want one season to have a season that was 4 months, another that's longer. Maybe you run 4 seasons. Some fashion doors might want to do by quarters, but do make sure you get that set so you know what you're looking at. So you've got comparable data then.
Yeah, makes your life easier, doesn't it, when you're looking at reports.
When to price point is a good question. This won't tell you when to price point. This will tell you how to price point. We find a good rule of thumb for price pointing is you've got everything right, your stock's online, but you're not quite hitting your revenue targets. And if you're not hitting your revenue targets and your return on investment in your Google shopping spend is struggling, those 2 things together are usually a good indication that price is starting to come into play in that season.
Okay.
If you're not hitting your revenue target, and you go and have a look at with a success team what your ROAS is, and your ROAS is really high, it's pump some more money into advertising.
Yeah.
Discounting is a marketing cost, so make sure you exhaust spend with Google before you start discounting. Now, if you're putting the money in and your return on investment, your ROAS is starting to not achieve where you want it to, that's usually the sign. You're not getting your conversions, you're off price.
Okay, and that's a strong indicator to start looking at.
Yeah, we find it is, yeah.
Which is when then you said to me, this is often when you turn to margin by brand and department, start looking at where that can be done. Yeah.
Straight into here. Now, the first round of price pointing, I always find quite exciting. Again, I don't know what that says about me, but you get what I call the paradox of discounting. So here, for example, on the screen, we can see our average margin is 43, weeks cover is 32. Now, with the first round of price pointing, we should have some brands that are achieving quite a lot more than the average margin. And we can play about with those and start to take a little bit more money off those so that the margin's still, so that individual brand's above the average margin, but then we drop the week's cover.
Yeah.
So you actually end up increasing your overall margin because you've got plenty of room to play with some good performing brands. Let's have a look, see if we could find one there. So you'd go anywhere where you're above 40 43, and if the week's cover is running a little bit high. So here we go. Outdoor vibes, okay? There's not a staggering amount of cost of goods on hand there, but let's just not worry too much about that right now. Let's have a look at the week's cover and the margin. Your week's cover there is at 100, so that's going too slow. And your margin's 48, so it's above your average. You could price point that category to bring down the week's cover. You'll lower the margin on that category itself, but if you do it correctly, your overall margin should...
You're still healthily above that average.
Yeah. So you dig in there, have a look for some more. You got things like caps there. The week's cover is way too high. You've not got lots of room to play with on margin there, but you could definitely do some price pointing there to get them shifting. Again, you have to contextualise it.
Yeah.
Why have caps not sold?
Yeah.
There may well be another reason. I know I was looking at my data yesterday, and it tells us that we're having a really bad time with shorts at the moment. That's not really a surprise, though, is it?
No.
So when you're price pointing here, we're looking for high weeks cover to indicate we need to do something.
Yeah.
And if we can find high weeks cover and it's got a margin above the average, you're really going to make some money at that point. And there will be times where you have a high weeks cover and the margin's below the average. Well, that might be a time to think about whether you're bringing that in again or not.
Absolutely. That's all really, really helpful. Thank you, Tom. And so if we move on to think about the seasonal buying planner, I know you guys tend to use this most of all when you're thinking about your budget setting.
Yeah.
So sort of planning and forecasting for those next seasons. So if I just bring us up some more sort of example or dummy data that we've got here. You mentioned to me as well that you tend to often export the seasonal buying planner to Excel and work with it there as well. So I didn't know if you wanted to tell us a bit more about your process at that point.
Yeah, so I think most businesses that you guys are working with will there be some pre-order nature to the business. It's the same with us. Knowing how much to pre-order was quite difficult before this report. You have to first start off with an overall strategy, and two things are going to factor into that. You looking into the crystal ball and trying to work out what's going to go on with your industry in the next 12 months.
Good luck with that one. Yeah.
I know we're having interesting conversations about that right now.
Yeah.
But that's a different webinar altogether. And then the other thing is you know how much you want to grow by. We might decide here that our growth is going to be, let's say, 20% for the season that we're pre-ordering for, and the aim of this is to always to bring in new brands for us. So we need money for that. The aim is to clear out dead wood, and siphon more money into the brands that are really working for you. So if we're gonna say we're growing at 20%, the first thing we'd be looking at here is Ciclo. Well, I might bring that brand in myself if anyone's got any contacts, because that appears to be doing all right. The week's cover on this is 18. The sell-through's great. Sorry, let me get my eye into there. It's a different report, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, the margin's not as... the margin's way down there. Well, that would be actually one that would be looking to possibly slow down the rate of sale on that one. Maybe speak to the brand about what the intake margin is on there. But your sell-through's great, your week's cover's low, but your margin's not good enough. You definitely want to be reordering that. Your cost of goods on hand, 64 plus cost of goods sold. So you brought in 170,000 for AW23. You could I'd be looking at that, going to go and do a deal with, and see what's going on with the margin there.
So you're combining, when you're, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things you're looking at in Excel as well is sort of totaling those columns of cost of goods sold, cost of goods on hand, to just give you a ballpark figure of what you bought.
You've indicated here that you're really looking for. If you've got high margin, high sell-through, it sounds quite obvious. It is.
Yeah.
But you're looking here for your margins to be above your average and your sell-throughs to be above your average. If you find that and you're going to grow at 20%, don't grow that brand by 20%. Grow it by more.
Yeah.
Because overall, you're going to want to be 20% up. And that gives you the ability then to get rid of brands further down.
So I'm looking here at Pedal Fast, which is towards the bottom of the report here. So it's not a brand that we've maybe particularly heavily invested in previously, but really strong sell-through, tracking nicely above the average margin, and a pretty low weeks cover.
With that one, you're going to increase, and if you've set your overall growth at 20%, that one needs to be far exceeding 20%, because that's performing really well, and that needs to start to move up towards the, as we call it, the engine room of the business, and get the cost of goods on hand increase there. This report's brilliant when you're going to do your pre-orders. Lots of brands, they'll ask you, how's it performing? Well, you could present the data to them. We've used this really, really well to negotiate much better terms with brands, to confidently increase our pre-orders by significant amounts, to the point at which you are, with the data that you're presenting, like either through volume, able to negotiate better deals, or you may well have brands that haven't got the performance that you require, that you can then do a better deal with intake margin.
Sure.
So that they're still ranged.
Just on that one, actually, Tom, one of the questions that I can see we've had submitted through the Q&A is if you could just explain a bit more about what you mean by intake margin and define what that means for you. So that might be a term everyone's familiar with.
Yeah, so if you're we typically mark up at 2.5.
Okay.
So in for 10, out for 25 quid. So in terms of intake margin, factored in the VAT, that's a 52%
okay.
intake margin. If you've got a straight double up on a product, bringing in for 10, selling for 20, that'd be a 40%
okay.
intake margin. So the more intake margin we can build in, the better these reports are going to look. Having that information on how a brand is exiting your business is really, really useful. If you're having to discount, your exit margin will be struggling. One of the ways around that, if a brand wants to keep on working with you and vice versa, is to work on that intake margin. Having the data to go with the brand is the only way that they're going to agree to that.
Absolutely. So if I just summarise as well, one of the things we've said about a strategy to approach this, then we're looking not just, obviously we're looking for those high performers in sell-through and margin, as we've seen already, and then comparing against the week's cover and the cost on hand. And then we're thinking, well, what did we spend with that brand for our previous season or the previous year?
That bit there is your cost of goods on hand, plus your line cost of goods sold for that time period.
That gives us a ballpark figure of what we bought in, and then we can think, right, do we want to push that higher for next year's budget, or do we want to reduce it, and where are we allocating that budget? So that sounds great.
It really helps you it takes the risk out of your investments here, and it lets you know where your money's working. That's
brilliant. And so just to sort of move on to a final area that I know we talked about beforehand was when you actually get to placing those orders. So thinking a little bit more about the detail of actually putting those orders in with suppliers. And I know you and your buying team tend to go back towards something like the margin by brand and department report, but then maybe combine that with other cloud reports like top performing items.
Yes.
So you can actually then start looking at specific products, specific colour balances, a bit like we saw in the quantity sold report we looked at, and actually get that curve and balance of a particular range right.
Yeah. We do jump into top performing items. The previous exercise will really give you the ability to put more budget into some of your brands. And when you have so much budget going into any particular brand, you start to be able to see very strong trends in particular styles. Then it really gives you the confidence to be ordering tens, hundreds plus of a particular style.
Right.
And that's where you jump into the top selling items. So strides here, we've determined, well, margin's high, weeks cover's not brilliant, but it's okay, and the weeks cover there higher than the average, but there's plenty of room on the margin there to get that weeks covers down. Week covers down. So if I was going to pre-order strides, cost of goods on hand 86. So what we've done there, about £210,000. You probably keep that level. If your weeks cover had been closer to the average, that would be a brand to back even more. Because you'll notice what also follows suit with that drop, with that decrease in margin, is the cost of goods on hand.
And we've got that nice sort of upside down pyramid.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just stockpiling old gear there.
Brilliant.
When you're, what we do is, if we're placing an order with one of our big brands, and we're doing it for AW24 right now, we're obviously going to be very interested in AW23 data. But what's useful is what you've done here, Emma, is to bring up all the season codes. Because if overall of those season codes over that set time, the brand's exiting well, you know you've got the confidence to maybe even exceed the budget that you set for that time frame, because you've got plenty of run out room as you go into sale time.
So we've set that budget, and we saw obviously that in the previous report, how we can use the seasonal buying planner to help with that. But then when it comes to actually placing those orders, we're going to have the confidence in some areas to actually stretch that budget beyond, because we know it's going to move well and continue to move
absolutely, well. Because there's a value in having old seasons product around, because it is a discounted product. Having some discounted product on your website is great. It brings in much cheaper traffic on Google. There's different sorts of customers out there. The ideal isn't to sell out of your current season on the last day of that season. You want a tail to some extent of discounted stock, as long as you've got the right pattern on it, as long as you've got decreasing cost of goods on hand as it's getting older.
Yeah.
And by default you'll end up with that on margin as well.
Super. Well, that is great. That's all really helpful. So just coming to the end then of our time today, what we'll do is just check in again and see if we've got any further questions that have been submitted through the Q&A that we haven't touched on so far. So I'll just have a quick look. So we've got one here for you, Tom, if that's okay. Asking about what types of promotions do you use to accelerate the rate of sale or reduce the week's cover that isn't discounting, or are you pretty much solely focused on that discounting and price pointing? Are there any other tools that you use for that?
Yeah, well, we use customer rewards. Is really good for having a returning customers. We've got ours set at 5%, so it's quite high. The uptake on that is fantastic.
So you might look to set up a customer rewards promotion, perhaps, that offers extra incentive on those products.
You can do that, and I know that works really well for some stores to have, maybe double points. Bolting things onto that. We've set ours high at 5%.
Yeah.
So it's a continuous. We would promote that on newsletters. The other thing to use, and citrus lime customers have an advantage here because there's not a lot of other people that have the ability to do this, is the Star Buys offer.
Yep.
That works really, really well in order to help with conversion. I also think Star Buys is really good at getting your customers to return. Why come and get it from you? They can get that product from other places. So why from you? And if you're going to set up a Star Buy, we've tried it. Say for example, I remember we tried to clear a load of Adidas shoes on an old season code. So we put the older season code Adidas with new Adidas, and it didn't perform very well. People didn't particularly like that offer. What works well is to buy a product in as the Star Buy product and then attach that to the product that you want to get rid of. And
could that even be an own brand item? I know that's something you guys do.
It's something we do because we can build the right margin into our own product. So if I was looking to get rid of some bike kit, I would probably buy my own brand water bottle and offer it very, very cheap and attach it to the products that you want to get moving a bit quicker. I think there's an important thing with Star Buys is if you offer it, if you're gonna go with it because your customers will expect it.
Yeah.
And if it drops off, then it might have an adverse impact on conversion rate. But if you put a nice, simple, clear offer on Star Buys, keep it consistent, your customers know to expect that. As a percentage of sales, it varies for us, but a Star Buy item, it's between, I was thinking of the graph, I was doing it yesterday, its highest, it was at 8.9% of our total sales was a Star Buy item. The average, the average is just under 5%.
Yeah.
So, in itself, it's not an insignificant number.
No, yeah. So those additional products that you're tagging on, which for you guys is own brand product as well, beanies, t-shirts and so on, is actually helping to shift the products to which they're attached as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. No, that's really useful. Hopefully that answers that question. Okay. So I just want to say thank you so much again to Tom for joining us today. I'm sure that's been a really useful insight for lots of people about how to actually use these reports in a real world environment. Shared lots of your own best practice there, so we're really grateful for that. Thank you to everybody for joining us. I hope that's been a useful introduction. And obviously one of the things Tom and I have both said today is this is a starting point really. Go away, have a look at that data, start interrogating where the margin and sell-through in your business is coming from. And as always, if you need some more support with that, reach out to the support team if it's more of a how do I based query. Or you've also got your success team on hand, and they are great at helping you to strategize in all of the ways that Tom's been touching on this morning. So thank you everybody for joining us. There's a QR code on the screen there to our YouTube channel, which is where we'll be uploading a recording of today's webinar. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much for your time.